We're sitting down today with Lydia Schrader, who you may know as watercolor artist Lydia Marie Elizabeth. We dive into her creative journey from her design work in the early days to how she got into watercolor specifically in that medium, and even more specifically, how she landed on the themes of home, belonging, and the beauty of familiar places. As we head into the holiday season, her work reminds us of the deep-rooted warmth and meaning in the places we call home. It is in those spaces and places that we make memories, that our stories are passed down, and traditions come to life. It is my wish that this season bring you closer to that sense of place and to those cherished moments. I'm sure I'm not speaking out of turn that Lydia would wish the same after our conversation. It seemed pretty well aligned, and this was really just like a conversation with an old friend. It was so beautiful, and I hope that you enjoy it. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host and the founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's Silver. Lydia, thanks so much for being here. I'm super excited to chat, not only because I know you have some roots in my area, but because I've been following your work for a long time, and I'm just really excited to hear more about the intricacies of that and all of the fun things that you've been working on. You've obviously been growing pretty steadily over the last several years, which has been exciting to watch. So I want to just turn this over to you and let everyone know who you are and what it is that you do.
Oh, thanks, Allie, for having me. This is so exciting. My name is Lydia Schrader, and I paint under the name Lydia Marie Elizabeth. And I mostly focus on watercolors and I paint specific places. So I paint Hunt Country, Virginia, Palm Beach. I also love France. So I will paint France and Europe occasionally too. And I just had a collection that launched of Washington, D.C., which feels very poignant for the moment, but I'm kind of hoping it like completely sells out before November 6th. So I don't know where anybody stands politically, but it's for all Americans.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into this? Like, have you always been an artist?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question for like everyone, right? Because I feel like whatever you wind up becoming, it is a series of saying, of doing a task and realizing, okay, I'm willing to pick myself back up after a failure, keep going on this. Yes, I was always an artist. You too, like you've always been a good conversationalist and you've always been interested in people, and that's why you're here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the reason I became an artist was really because I think through art and note taking and visual representations of what I'm thinking. And so it was just like a natural progression of where my mind was when I was like formulating how to draw and think and write as a child. And now it's become full-fledged and a full career for me. But I started as an interior designer in my professional career. So I went to school for interior design at Drexel University. I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved doing the finishes and I loved residential and hospitality design. So I did restaurants outside of New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut for a little while. Loved it. I loved working for the architect I worked for. I loved the whole team. But then when I got married, I went to Philadelphia, and one of my favorite things about interiors was doing the renderings for spaces. So my boss would be like, okay, Lydia can do the rendering. And I was like, yes, that's so great. So I got married and moved to Philadelphia, and there weren't any restaurant designers in Philadelphia. It was all in New York City. And I didn't really relish the idea of a 2-hour train commute. And I didn't think I was an entrepreneur, but like the more I have been, the more I'm like, this is obviously what I am and how I have to think through things. So it just made sense to start a company and see where it led. And I think at every step of the way, I was like, God, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, just open doors. And if it's not, please close them. And I've been so humbled by how many incredible businesses have been willing to work with me and have sought me out to work with me. And I've just been really grateful for that. I can't believe I've gotten to work with the teams that I've gotten to work with and gotten to paint for a living. I mean, it's exciting and kind of amazing. So,
Well, the doors have certainly been opened, that's for sure, which is incredible. I was curious how did you, well, okay, this is a twofold question. How did you land on watercolor? But then also, what about interior design do you feel like you pull into the fine arts?
that's a really good question. So I started in watercolor probably because it's a faster and easier medium to just pick up and drop instead of oil where you like pull all the pigment out of the tube, you have to mix it and then it has to dry and it's very smelly and like you have to open windows and it's a process. When I started my company, I was single in Greenwich, like in my bedroom and doing little sketches and then I'd run out the door to like go to happy hour and hang out with my friends, right? So it was easier to pick up. And my cousin actually is an artist. She's not full time, but she was really like the catalyst. When I was 5 years old, she would like take me out in their backyard and we would like paint the strawberry bushes. She's like 11 years older than me. And I'm like, that's so nice.
It
What
is. She like
cousin?
fostered that in you, yeah, and shared that with you.
Yeah, just like a really generous, wonderful person. So that's kind of why watercolor. And then I think you kind of fall in love with the medium and you see like how it builds and you can really capture light and depth of color in a different way than oil. I do love oil. I've done a couple oils, but that's why watercolor.
With it nearly being November, of course, we start to think about like the themes of gratitude and home and sense of place. And I really wanted to talk about that a little bit more with you today because I feel like so much of what you paint
Mhm.
has to do with sense of place. And I feel like you just do such a beautiful job of capturing different spaces, places, things that are near and dear to people's hearts. And I would be really interested what that process looks like for
Yeah,
you behind the scenes. You're interpreting something and
yeah.
putting it to paper.
Well, so I was particularly excited to talk with you because you mentioned that in your email to me that you wanted to talk about that. And that is the wellspring of which all my artwork comes from, is that idea of what is home. And I think so much in our lives, just, not even like beyond our individual microculture or culture at large, we all have this idea of being homesick. But I think if you like tried to nail somebody down on like, what that means, you hear cliche things. I want my mom's cooking or I want my bed or something. I think that's true. And all those things are kind of dancing around the idea that when we feel homesick, what we're trying to express is that we feel a sense of alienation in the place that we are. And there's a pull to be in a place that we feel loved and known and that we should belong there. So I think in every human being, we have this sense of, I was created to be somewhere. I was created for a place. Behind the scenes of the creation of my art, and specifically the Hunt Country collection, which is a portrait of home, is that when I'm painting and I'm really like in the moment, I'm usually listening to sermons or books and a lot of C.S. Lewis, a lot of Tim Keller. Also, I was just telling my husband yesterday, I was like, this is a behind the scenes of my real personality. I was like, Brent, what would you rather do than like sit on our phones all night? And he's like, I don't know. What do you want to do? I was like, I wish I read poetry. Really? You wish you were like reading Homer? And I was like, I do. I do wish I was reading Homer.
But I think that's the creative. I think as creatives, we will often romanticize
Mm.
because I do the same thing. Like I have this vision that I'm basically a colonial woman.
Yes, yes, you are. You
And
are.
but actually I'm downstairs like watching the Real Housewives. Like
Yes,
yes.
absolutely. Yes. And I think that was something that drew me. Well, actually, it's kind of something that like pushed me away from art for so many years. Like, I was in high school and my teachers were like, go look at SCAD or go look at RISD and go for art. And I was like, no, I mean, you can't make a career in art, irony of all ironies. Um, and so I went to like some portfolio days and they were like, you should think about illustration. And I was like, I don't want to be an illustrator. I was just headstrong and like super bratty and very obnoxious. And I think I saw the art community because we live in like the postmodern era of art. And I think it's like all about being angry and showing the horrible traumas that have happened to us. And I think I was just, well, I haven't suffered any atrocity. Like I'm not a tortured soul in the way that I saw other successful artists being. And I don't have that story. So, like, nobody wants to hear from me. And I think that's such a lie of our culture and such a lie of art or the art community as I saw it. Not that like the art community is actually like that, but from my perspective as a 16, 17-year old, which is nothing. But there are so many artists who are really leaning into that. And I think I want to make art that is beautiful and lifts us up and makes us look to the good in the world and reminds us that there is something good because we see so many horrible things in the world. And, the news is just a constant reminder of how awful things are. Yes, we need to know about the horrible things in the world, but we need to be reminding each other and encouraging each other that there is goodness and there is truth. And that's what we stake our lives on, not on, it's a dying ship. uh, the ship is going down, but what do we do because of that? I'm a Christian, so I think we have to remind ourselves that there's beauty and truth and goodness and purity. And that's what I want my art to remind us of. And I think in those early moments, I was in art history. Did you take art history classes
I
in school?
did.
Me too. In that period of time of moving away from the French Academy that was so stringent, they were like, you have to paint realistically. You can't see brushstrokes. You have to paint like religious iconography and it has to be like an epic story, right? Like, then the Impressionists came along and they started painting these revolutionarily beautiful scenes of light and everyday moments. But since that moment, I think people have been like, oh, anything can be beautiful, so much so that Marcel Duchamp put a urinal in an art museum. Okay, Marcel Duchamp, we get it. But like, no, I don't think that's where our minds should be. So I felt like in art history, I feel like there was a mockery of the modern artists and gallerists and art critics of the true, the good, and the beautiful, because perhaps it had been pushed like too legalistically in some ways in art, right? It was like, well, you have to paint this. And people are like, all right, I'll paint this so that I can like make a paycheck. It's kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you let art become just urinals in museums. We
Mhm.
still need Monet, we still need Caravaggio. And like, I know those are all like little cans of worms in and of themselves, but we still need that art and we still need to be reminded of the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Well, I love that. And, I know that you were saying, oh, 16, 17, your worldview hadn't quite been shaped, right?
Yeah.
That, even now, perhaps, I mean, we all have lived experiences that influence us in our
Yeah.
lives, as a creative, it influences your work. But at the same time, you hit on something so important, which is that what comes through and what you're channeling into your art doesn't always have to be the things that you need to process. And I think it's beautiful that you're able to actually create art from a base of gratitude.
That's interesting that you said you don't have to always be processing something in art. That's so true. Although it makes me think of one piece I did that I was processing. So, my best friend had a stroke 2 years ago,
Mm.
and she was in a coma for a year. And
Wow.
it was like one of those hard things that is awful, and like we didn't know in those moments like if she was dying or if she was going to come out of it. And the doctors were like, yeah, she'll have a recovery, but it seemed really dark for a very long time. The piece I painted was of two horseback riders and some hounds in this shadowy and sort of like dappled sunlight. And I was just thinking how in difficult moments we need community and we need friends to say, hey, there's something to live for, and there's a patch of sunlight right here, and let's focus on that sunlight. You might be in the shadows now, but there's hope ahead. Look how there's hope.
It's the same situation, right? I mean, that's a horrific situation to have to experience, to
Yeah.
again have to process. Very hopeful that
Yeah,
she is
she's doing better.
okay. But that's a very hopeless situation. And I think as an artist, one of the beautiful things that you're able to do is to create that hope for people. From my perspective, is, I often don't necessarily, I can appreciate art that tells a deeper, darker story, but is that something that I want to sit in my dining room?
Right. It's funny because I think when we look in magazines, we've all looked at like celebrity homes and been like, oh, I want that house so much, right? It's interesting because most of us don't have five homes that we're bouncing between. If you do have five homes, you might have the luxury of having a piece in a dining room that's really heavy, but you don't have to go there every day. Like I only have one house. If I'm going into my dining room, I don't want to be confronted with whatever that piece of art is that's so heavy, unless there's hope on the other end of it, you know? And there is
Right.
I'm sure there's art that's dark that does remind people of hope and a good thing.
Mhm.
I'm not an abstract artist. I love abstract art, but I do wonder when we look at so many homes and they have beautiful abstract art, I do wonder why, there's not more representational art in homes, or it's in the magazine homes, because I think
Yeah.
like I know that many of my clients have my representational art in their homes, and I have a lot of like artist friends who have representational art that are in homes. So I think there's a particular person who has that, but I think the widespread popularity of abstract art is just because people are like, well, I don't know how to handle the themes in this representational art, or what can just kind of go with everything, and beautiful color. And it is just an interesting thought that I was having actually yesterday, like thinking through representational art and abstract art, and there's a space for all of it, and it's just interesting like what's popular in some types of homes, but then in grand millennial homes, as you are an astute collector of, there is more of representational art.
A lot of watercolor, which is interesting. Yeah, I do think there's a lot, it's very place-based. I don't see much grand millennial abstract art. You said
Yeah.
abstract art. I really don't see much of that. I consider that more like I would see that in a lot of like modern contemporary homes. So yeah, it is very interesting. And I don't know if that just harkens to the idea of like nostalgia and that connection that grand millennial tends to have with nostalgia, and
Yes.
that art evokes a certain feeling in us, which I mean, I can say right off the bat, your art does for me, which is again leads us back to sense of place and that sense of belonging, right? It just makes you feel warm and fuzzy, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I do think the grand millennial, I also so connect with it. It's a idea of everything has like a reason behind it.
Mhm.
It was my grandmother's, or like I picked it up in the antique shop when I was traveling across the country and I loved it. Like everything tells a story.
I do want to just go back because again, talking about story, I would love to hear you touched on it briefly, but maybe we could talk a little bit more about the inspiration behind if you wanted to talk about specific collections or specific works. Are you looking for specific sources of inspiration? Are they all personal to you? Are they things that other people are telling you, like, we love this part of this place? And so you're then capturing that?
Yes to all of those things. So When I started painting full time, I thought that I was going to focus on like architecture and interiors. I remember my dad was like, "So Lydia, like, what's the plan here?" And I had this whole, obviously, like everyone wants a painting of their home, and like it's so important. And he was like, "No, this sounds like a great idea. Great, great, great." It started. So I started doing like house portraits, and I loved having the conversation with my clients in those early days of what is important to you about your home, what do you love about your home, and a sentence from them, or like this whole paragraph about like how they took it from this rundown house. They put so much love and soul into it. And one of my clients was like, what's the flower that kind of like hang down, the lilacs that like hung down on this trellis. And she was like, my husband planted these
Uh,
forever to,
Wisteria.
that's the one. The wisteria. Yeah. So he planted it, and I just like, so connected with it. And it was probably one of my last commissions of houses. I loved the client relationship of like, why I'm painting this for you. And it would make me connect with the piece. And so gradually, the business has grown from that conversation with a homeowner to a person who is running a company and needs to communicate how chic their hotel is. I really like a back and forth with a client of what are we wanting to accomplish here, and looking at a scene and thinking what elements are communicating that to us. What elements might somebody be missing who's talking to me, and trying to like eke that out. So it might be a perspective that is iconic. So I think everything I paint, I want to feel iconic in some way. I feel like that's like the lamest thing I've ever said.
But it makes sense. And well, keep going. I won't speak to it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense.
Well, and I want it to be at least in those initial moments of a collection, right? So like the DC collection is like, this is the first 12 paintings I've done of this area. And so they are the ones that when you go to DC, if you've only been once and you've only been like on your way to the airport or on the way to the train station, like you've seen these buildings, or you've only been there a day, or you've lived there your whole life. These are the elements that you see no matter what. So it's, the Capitol, the White House, the monuments. And in Palm Beach, it's the clock tower. So they're public facing spaces. The longer I go in a collection, right? So the Hunt Country collection and the Palm Beach collection are good examples of this. The more I paint a space, the more I'm there and seeing more intimate views of places. I've gone down to Palm Beach and the Breakers, and I know the iconic public scenes, and I also know the more intimate scenes that, like, only that person who's walking this every day with their dog would see and love. But in all of those elements, I'm still trying to sort of condense everything down to the few elements that are communicating that love of place and that sense of you belonging to that place.
Well, okay, so that is essentially what I was going to almost ask because, like when you said icons, of course, I was like, no, that makes perfect sense because you're honestly calling out the icons of a place. But it's not like I look at your collections and just feel like I've got like a tourist's portfolio. Those details, I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's what I was going to ask about was there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
Like it does have that recognition,
Yeah.
the Capitol, the Washington Monument. I could be a resident and be like, wow, she really understands this place.
So nice of you to say.
As someone who studies images a lot, and also as someone who, again, like probably like my background, but I really appreciate like understanding people, places, what
Yeah.
makes a culture, why certain areas are so popular, why people do love them. So I just like inherently, I think, start to look for that. And I
Yeah.
do feel like in your art, you are capturing bits and pieces of that because it doesn't feel like I'm just looking at a postcard. It doesn't feel like you're working off a picture.
Thanks so much for saying all of that. That like
Oh, you're welcome.
it's so interesting because I was recently somewhere and I saw these watercolors on the wall, and I think every artist looks at something and they're like, oh, I want to paint like that. Actually, one of my art teachers was like, okay, bring in a painting of something you want to paint like, and I was like, huh, I've never thought of it like that. And then I realized I want to paint like myself. What we all really want to do, we want to be like whatever X is, only ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was looking at these paintings and I was like, wow, like those are so incredible. Like, I wish I could do that. And then I started looking harder and okay, but this artist was making decisions that like I would never make because I don't want to put down like a gray shadow, even though that might be like a very realistic thing in the grand scheme of the image. I want my shadows to be purple or blue, and I want them to feel electric. And so it was like an interesting realization of, I guess, because this is also probably going to sound like stupid, but I think deep down there's always a sense in all of us that I'm not unique. I can be replaced. Like in
Not
a
stupid
job.
at all. You're calling out a very poignant human feeling and
Yeah.
emotion.
And I guess it was like me realizing like, okay, maybe there is something unique about how I'm approaching this. I shouldn't be always looking at something else and thinking I want to be like that person, or we should be happy with how we can approach and how our different perspectives illuminate the world and show the truth and the beauty, right?
Hmm. I love
Yeah.
that. Going back to this idea then of kind of you capturing spaces that are near and dear to you in particular, could we talk a little bit about that sense of belonging that tends to be that common thread, right? Like you've heard of people who go back home, or, if you have the misfortune of losing a parent, or you're celebrating a holiday without, some of those things that those identifiers of home,
Yeah.
it changes the feel. People will often go to new areas and then say, this feels like home, or this reminds me of so and so, and now it feels like home.
Mhm.
So I think that was an important thing that you hit on, because there are those common threads. And I think that's a big part of also why you are able to paint different spaces and pull out some of those details that make people feel connected. And I wanted to know a little bit about maybe some of these areas that you've called home and have painted. If
Mhm.
we were to take, I know you paint Middleburg a lot. And so if you wanted to even take Middleburg, like what about Middleburg do you tell people about that just you think makes it so special?
Well, and these are great questions because we're moving and our house is still currently intact. And I'm like, we're losing and our realtor came in and she was like, it's a home. And I was like, shoot, it is a home. And now we're dismantling it and bringing it somewhere else. Anyway, yeah, I think the elements of home, and this is so good because I think about this often. So there was actually like what makes a place home is probably that things stay the same in some level and they are visually recognizable and that the people that were there are still there and our relationship is steady with those people. Those are probably the things that make a place on a grand level feel like home to us. When we go to find a new home, I've had friends ask me, okay, I'm in a new apartment. Like, what should I put up that's going to make it feel like home? And I'm like, art, curtains, wallpaper, paint, pillows, just like fill it with all your favorite things. In terms of what makes Middleburg special, and I think what makes Palm Beach special, which there's a lot of levels to this, is that they have kind of stayed the same over the years. So the area I'm from is Loudoun County, Virginia, and Loudoun County is notorious, I think, probably only to ourselves because Loudoun Countyers are like the only people who are like, it's growing so much. And everyone else in the world is like, what even is Loudoun County? But we moved there when I was 7 from Connecticut to Leesburg. It was very far away from DC at the time. I think it's still kind of considered, like, oh my, if you're in DC, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so far away because it takes forever to get there. But when we moved there, like the downtown was super sleepy. It was tiny. There were only so many businesses. There weren't any overpasses. And only a few years ago, I was driving back up to my parents' house, and my parents' summer up in Maine. So I was driving back to their house in Virginia, which was nobody was there. It was late at night and I was coming up to, a place where I grew up. I learned how to drive there. I knew the roads. I knew how long the lights were. Everything held meaning for me. And I was driving up and I was like, did I take a wrong turn? I don't know where I am. What a powerful analogy for going home and a sense of place. It brought me back to in scripture, when Adam and Eve were created for a place, they were created for the Garden of Eden, they're created for their home, and then original sin expelled them from the Garden of Eden. And I was just thinking, like, wow, what it must have felt like to suddenly now we know that the Garden of Eden is, but we were expelled from it and we can't go back and we can't find our way back. It just made me think, wow, what that might have felt like if they knew where they were from, but they couldn't get back and they couldn't find their way back. And it turns out I hadn't taken a wrong turn. They had just completely changed everything. There were these huge overpasses instead of, you know, the one little light that used to hang there. There was like this huge highway.
It is very disorienting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We used to joke, like, in those times. One of my friends was like, yeah, my mom left and she couldn't find her way home. And because it's like changed so much.
You're describing preservation. Home is like we
Yeah.
don't want, things feel the same. And
Yeah.
then these spaces that have this history and storied past, and again, let's preface like that doesn't always, it's not always a pretty thing,
Right.
history. If we're talking about preservation, like a big part of preservation, and it has such a negative connotation sometimes because a
Mhm.
space can maintain its historic integrity and still grow and modernize, but still maintain its.
Integrity. That's such a good point. And those places, Palm Beach and Middleburg, they're fierce fights
Oh
for
yeah. Oh
preservation.
yeah.
And
Preservation is big.
yeah, and I think it's important, and I think it's not to like pull back progress. And we know people need homes, they need places to live, and if, farmland isn't being farmed, people are like, okay, let's develop it into homes. And I think I understand that, but yeah, it's.
It hurts too. It does. It is sad. I mean, I was just driving the other day through a shopping center and I still, like, I've been there multiple times since they put up all these giant apartments, but it
Yeah.
used to just be a field. And it
Yes.
was one of those situations where I was at the light and I really paused and like looked around. And for a second, I had that hit in my stomach of, did I take a wrong turn? Where am I? And then I remembered, oh, this is just what it looks like now. Like they put up, I mean, it has to be acres
Oh my
of
gosh.
these apartment complexes, which, like, I get it. The area has grown. It's a little sad because my memory of it, that memory is all you have now. You cling to that.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I'm not mad about it, but it is different. Like it's a different feel than when I was able to just sit there and like look at land and land and land.
I think that too, like when it's in a shopping mall that you like going to, even everything affects how you interact with the land. Like the sunshine is going to hit the road in a different way. It's going to come through the trees. Maybe it won't come through those trees.
That was
It's
a
like,
beautiful artist thing to say. I love that so much.
but that affects like
It does.
everything about our
It does.
experience in a place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a crazy thing to be living in a world that is constantly changing, but we've always lived, like human beings have always lived in
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
That's so true. You just mentioned change and progress. So I'm wondering if we could switch gears for a second here because you have calendars that will be, they're out?
Yes,
They're
yes,
already out. I think I
they
did see
are.
that they're out. Okay.
Yes, are out.
So yeah, tell us about those and how people can grab them.
Yes, absolutely. So this year for 2025, we have the Hunt Country Calendar, which features lots of bucolic scenes of equestrian scenes and fox hunting scenes, as well as still pasture and estate scenes. We have the Palm Beach calendar, which is one of my favorites. And that, of course, has lots of palms and lots of beautiful sunshine and features the clock tower, the breakers, all of the iconic scenes of Palm Beach. Also, the DC collection became a calendar this year. I think that collection I love because it's about American values and something that we share no matter what side of the fence you wind up falling on, or if you're trying not to be political, you can still love it. So those 3 calendars we have, and they all come specially packed. So we have special tissue paper that it all wraps up in, and it's all like very custom designed. And my sister-in-law helps me now, and she puts all of them together by hand. So it's really, she's the best
That's
for
so
doing it.
special.
So she's like putting hundreds of them together and sending them out. And I think the country calendar is almost sold out. Those do so well, and they're all to be a daily reminder of that hope and beauty that we were talking about at the beginning, and hopefully to cause our eyes to be lifted up instead of being sad.
Well, that's super exciting. I will, of course, make sure to share links. So
Oh,
in the show notes, so people who are listening, it'll be in the show notes, links to your website. So people can, of course, check out your work, but they'll also see your work if they follow along on Instagram. So we'll post that too. And I think my last question is, because we're gearing up for the holiday season, what is one tradition that you are just super excited about, especially maybe a bittersweet one now that
yeah.
you'll be moving, because you'll be celebrating some traditions here and then creating new ones in your new home. So what does the holiday season look like for you this year?
It's always a ton of travel. Isn't that like so? That's the tradition. We travel to everyone. Yeah, we love Christmas Day, kind of that's when we like open all our presents. And so on Christmas Day, my dad always used to make this like Swedish bread. Actually, on Christmas and Easter, they would make this Swedish bread. We're not Swedish, but we make sweet bread.
We like their carbs anyway.
Yeah, we love carbs. And so that was always like a very special thing, like a sweet breakfast bread and tea and coffee. Um, yeah, those are probably like our favorite things. I'm sure there's like much more storybook things I could say, but I don't know.
That's a special one to you. That's perfect. And that's, again, one of those things that like that makes your holiday a holiday.
Yeah. Wait,
Yeah.
what do you do? Do you have like traditions and something you?
We don't have kids yet, but we have so many nieces and nephews. And so I have just so enjoyed their joy on Christmas morning, getting to be, and Christmas Eve, like that anticipation, getting to relive that through them has just been so special. I grew up doing like the NORAD track Santa.
Fun.
It's been so special now, like at Christmas Eve dinner, all my nieces and nephews come up to me and they'll say like, Aunt Allie, can you see where Santa is? And it's just so special. And it's just I really do feel like just experiencing their joy has just become so anticipatory for me.
That's so
But,
cute.
and of course the food. I mean, I'm right there with you with
That's
the
true.
food.
Yes, the
The
food.
food is high up on that list too.
Yeah,
So
so true.
I have so enjoyed chatting with you. This has been a beautiful conversation. Thank you for not only sharing so much of yourself in your art, but here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Allie. It's been a pleasure.